Welcome, friends, to the Play Guitar Podcast. I am Lee, and I'm here to help you become the guitar player that you always wanted to be. We're going to have a good time today. We're going to be talking about arpeggios. It's riveting. No, it's really fun. It's really fun. When you can use arpeggios effectively, when you can use them like spices throughout your writing or your improv, things really take off. It's very interesting how these strong notes, these notes that are in chords, how you can move from one to the other one, how you connect them. And then when you put that in a chord progression, arpeggios from one to the next, it's really interesting. A lot of the sounds, I remember when I started really understanding arpeggios and really using them, all the sounds that I heard from Led Zeppelin and, even like the Police. And, I started to understand where those sounds came from and was able to make things similar to that on my own at will. It's really important. Arpeggios are the notes that make up a chord, and you play them one at a time. They're like a line. They're not stacked like a chord. We've spread them out. To me, they're important. They're the bridge between scales and chords. Usually, hey, we work on our chords over here and we work our scales over here. And at some point, things meet. You've seen those players that just effortlessly move between chords and scales. And it just, they'll be playing something and playing, a lick or something like that and pop in 3 or 4 chords just out of nowhere there, right? That's where you want to be. So what happened to me, and I'm pretty sure a lot of you, is that practicing arpeggios, if you spend the time on it, the way that it has been approached, at least when I was starting, maybe it's different now, I don't know, but the learning these arpeggios on their own, they had little to no effect on my playing when I was actually in a place where I could use something. I needed some of these sounds. And the way I practiced them, I worked on them. I worked on them and worked on them and worked on them. And I go to a jam, my headspace was in a different place. I wasn't in arpeggio land. That was what I practiced over here. And when I was creating or soloing, they were out of mind. So being able to see them and being able to relate arpeggios to your chord shapes and your scale patterns, which is what you're actually using when you're playing a song, is the key to using them effectively. We have to marry them to the things we're already doing. It makes sense. Where do you spend most of your time when you're playing? Playing chords and playing scales. So if your arpeggios, the practice that you do with them, if they're disconnected from those two things, they're probably not going to get used or used well. So I'm going to say it would be a good idea for you to allocate a small part of your daily practice routine to learning arpeggios. Even if you're as far back as like an early intermediate player. With beginners, you might want to work into it. But early intermediate, I would start right away. What do? Arpeggios help your ear training. They also help with your chord knowledge. What are the notes in the chords? They help with your phrasing. They help with your strong and weak notes, recognizing those things. There's nothing but good stuff that you can get from arpeggios. And the sooner you start to work on them, the sooner your playing and your theory knowledge are going to meet. And they'll shake hands and they'll start moving forward. Right? So this week, the lesson, now this is not the lesson, this is the podcast. We're going to discuss these things. If you're looking for all the playing and stuff, click the link in the description. That's a different video. This is getting to the bottom of these things. And a lot of people, they say, well, it's too much talk. Too much talk here. Well, if you listen to some of these things that I'm trying to say, it will make the playing better and faster. Understanding what you're doing is important. And just by showing you something on the guitar over and over again doesn't always affect your understanding. We have to do some communication here. So that's what we're going to be doing today. What I do is I have 3 areas of practice that you could use to working on these arpeggios to really get them effective in your playing. And the first one is the one that we most start with, breaking up chords. So you're playing your D, your G, your C chords. So, and you think, okay, well, okay, what's an effective use of arpeggios? Well, being able to go in and out of strumming chords and then playing the single notes of the arpeggios. It's the first place we all start. And you know, you can do it with fingerstyle, you can do it with a pick. Why would you want to do that? Why would you want to break a chord up? Well, it creates interest. Hearing the different notes of the chords and the movement it creates. One thing about the guitar that's different than the piano. Piano has all of the notes laid out in order. We have an overlapping system with the guitar. At the 5th fret, you all know this, you play the 5th fret, and it's the same note as the next string. Play the 5th fret of that string, it's the same note as the next string. So that tells you that things overlap a little bit. It allows us to get these very wide chords, wide voicings of chords, in a very easy way. With the what we call a grip, or in a space of 4 frets there. But what it does do, it kind of mixes things up a little bit. Where on the piano you can see root, 3rd, 5th, root, 3rd, 5th, all in a row. On the guitar, arpeggios are not always in order, which can be very nice. You may not be able to go from the root to the 3rd. You might have to go to the root to the 5th. It depends on the voicing there. But learning these arpeggios, taking the time to go, okay, well, what are the notes of these chords? If I play a D, I've got a D, I've got an A. So it went right from the root, D is the root of the chord, to the 5th of the chord. Makes my point exactly. So root to 5th, to a double of the root, to the major 3rd on the top. This voicing, that major 3rd on top, is very familiar to us, right? But when you know those notes, you might be able to do something with them. You could add, okay, well, the 3rd, if I go up a fret, that gives me a sus4 chord, and I can resolve it back to the 3rd. If you know the notes, that you can do things with them, and it can start to open up the fretboard for you. The next place where arpeggios can be effective is in your scales. And for a lead guitar player, this is where you want to focus. This video I gave today, which is out already by the time you hear this, is 3 different practice exercises to start knowing all the arpeggios inside your scale patterns. I gave the example in the video when I started to learn. I did diatonic arpeggios and kind of like this, across the neck of the guitar and shifting a pattern, shifting up and shifting up, shifting up, shifting up. And they were on their own. If you wanted to play arpeggios, you have to play those over there. That didn't help me because I was playing scales and I was playing chords and I wanted to use them in there. And I didn't want to have something that sounded like this. I guess you could sweep that, but that would be, sweep arpeggios. They have a very distinct sound. They have an 80s hard rock type sound, which is not something that I was going for. I didn't use them for that. But what I did need was to be able to use some chord fragments, parts of arpeggios, maybe not 2 octaves. You don't have to play the whole arpeggio. You can play just a few notes of that. So if I was playing just off the top of my head, I was noodling around in C and using little bits of arpeggios. This one. Those are off of the C major. arpeggio there. I did a couple others. I don't remember what I did because I just did it off the top of my head. But using these little arpeggios, jumping from strong note to strong note to strong note, and then using scales to connect these strong notes. Wow, those are great starting points. Even if you did something just as simple as starting on an arpeggio note of one chord and then using the scale to go to the arpeggio notes of a next chord, the chord tones, this gives you ideas. And moving up and down with these strong notes, it creates strong sounds. You don't want all strong sounds. You'll start to sound like a bugle player, I won't play, but playing all chord tones. We don't want to play all of them, but doing them in a row like this, we've all heard it. It's a really cool sound. The next thing about this is targeting chords, connecting melodies with a clear destination, which I just spoke about. And then the third one, strong and weak note mastery. Okay, so if you have these arpeggios in your scale pattern, let's say you're in C major, and your C chord goes to a D minor chord, a 2 chord, right? And you're playing and you're starting to use these same strong notes, the C, E, and G, while the D minor chord, while you have a 2 chord playing, where you have a different chord underneath your fingers, those same strong notes that work for the 1 chord, they're not going to work anymore. So how do I know, well, where are the notes in this scale pattern that match the D minor, the 2 chord? There we go. It's root, minor third, 5th of the D chord, right? So that would take me a little bit of time to find if I didn't know my arpeggios. Now, one of the examples in the lesson this week is playing these arpeggios inside the scale pattern. So I'm in pattern 1, C major. And I'm just starting on a low C, and skipping every other note. Now I move to the next note in the scale, which is the D. This is at the 5th fret of the A string. And I'll do every other note in that scale again. There are my D minor arpeggio notes. It's that easy. They come directly from the scale, and you just skip every other note. Well, what's the next chord? The next chord in C isn't, the 3 chord is E minor. So I'm going to start on my E in that scale, the C major scale, and skip every other note. E, skip F, go to G. Skip A, go to B. Those are the notes in my E minor chord. You can check them. You can find the E minors that you're used to and see, does it have an E? Does it have a G? Does it have a B? Each note of the scale gets an arpeggio off of that by skipping every other note from that note. But as you do this as a practice these strong sounds. How can you play off of strong sounds if you don't know how to play the strong sounds in the first place? And this is a great way to do it. In fact, for Academy members, we have a backing track that's like C major, D minor, E minor. It goes right through all of the diatonic chords, the major, minor, minor, major, major, minor, diminished, and back to major again. And so you can practice going over these. Now, I would suggest that you take a look at those practice sheets. They're pretty cool. Okay, so say you're practicing that. You've got your strong notes now. Where does this come out? Jamming. We hear about aimless solos all the time. I hear it every day. My solos sound aimless. I don't really sound like I have a point to that. And I always say, you've heard me say it a bunch of times here, if you have aimless solos, it'll take aim. It's that easy. What are you aiming for? If you're playing solos, what are you aiming for? Well, when you're playing the aimless solos, you're probably aiming to sound like someone else, right? My aim is to sound like Eddie Van Halen, or my aim is to sound like Dickie Betts, or my aim is to sound like Carlos Santana or something like this. But what are they doing? What's Carlos Santana doing? Is he aiming to sound like something? No, he's paying attention to the chord progressions that he's playing over. He's taking aim at the chords. And that's where I would like for you to take aim. Take aim at the chords that are playing at the time. we've all heard, well, if it's in the key of A, you just play the A scale and you'll be fine. And we've all tried that, and it's with less than stellar results, I would assume. At least that's the way it worked for me, right? So I said, there's got to be more to this. What is it? Is it just magical things? Are these people just so naturally talented that I'll never be able to play like them? No, they were taking control of the harmony of the song with their melodies. How do you do that? Pay attention to the chords. What are the chords? What are the notes in the chords? What are the strong notes in this chord? And what are the strong notes in that chord? Then you can take that A scale that works over all of them pretty well and connect those notes. You see where I'm going with this, right? So using arpeggios when you are jamming as target notes and as notes to move around with, it's very, very, very important. The more you practice these very basic arpeggio patterns inside the scale patterns, I have to stress that enough. If you just play arpeggios that are voiced across the neck of the guitar, you're not going to use them very well. Put them in your scale patterns. Don't do 2 octaves of them. Just do 1 octave. Do the root, the third, and the fifth, then move to the next note, root, the third, and the fifth. This is where you're going to start to build your ear. You're going to see these small shapes that you can use in your licks. It's really, really, really important. And so to close this out, I want to talk a little bit about my history with teaching arpeggios. So I learned the arpeggios, and I thought I was fancy because I could play them. I could do a little sweeping and all those kind of things. This is back a long time ago. And I learned them. And like I said, I didn't use them very much. When I was playing on a rock song, I was playing, just minor pentatonic licks and hoping for the best. Now, enter me teaching. I started teaching when I was 18, and I get better and better and better. It was something that I got better at over time too. But in the beginning, I just said, well, here's the arpeggios you need to learn. Learn these. And I was just basically passing down the problems that I had previously, right? And passing them on to someone else. Here, learn these arpeggios. Okay, how do I use them? Well, you throw them in with your scales. How do I do that? Well, it's tough. You work at it, right? No. So over time, I stopped teaching arpeggios on purpose. For a long time, I did that. I taught the scale patterns, and then I taught something called strong and weak notes, targeting the chord tones. And then what I started to find out was that over time, these students, where we got used to targeting the chord things, they would start to notice something. Hey, when I target these strong shapes, these strong notes, there's familiar shapes that they're making. This one looks like a C major, and this one looks like an E. The cage shapes, right? Especially for major arpeggios, right? So this one looks like, oh, I see that, and this one looks like a D with that little triangle there. Okay. So now they discovered it on their own, and it made sense to them, and they never forgot them. Right? Okay, this is something that I discovered as I was learning, and it's as a useful tool now, instead of me just giving you disjointed arpeggio shapes. So I thought, well, okay, how can I speed this up? Where they're finding these arpeggios is through their scale patterns. Why not teach them inside the scale patterns? Maybe along with that. Diatonic. And I say diatonic all the time, assuming that you know what it means because I say it so much. But diatonic, it doesn't have anything to do with two or die or anything. It means that the chords that are created from the scale, the family of chords. So if you have a C major scale, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, we can build a chord off of each note of the scale, and they all are related. They work together. A C, it's a C major, D, D minor, E, E minor, F major, G major, A minor, B diminished, C major. They all work together. And if you'll see a song in the key of C, most of the time you're going to be hearing those chords. Those are the chords that are going to match. Now, of course, we have something called borrowed chords. People try to get fancy with and it is fancy, with their songwriting and use some other chords that aren't diatonic, that don't sound super inside. And that's great too. But the first place to start with this is the diatonic chords, and being able to know the arpeggios of these chords inside the scale pattern, and being able to use fragments of that in your licks at will, and being able to go in and out of arpeggios whenever that you would like to, is really, really fantastic. Think of the Sweet Child of Mine, right? That's an arpeggio. Few arpeggios going in there. Very cool sounds. And if you can use them where they don't sound like a study, that's where I'm getting at with this. I want you to be able to play arpeggios, practice them. Go ahead, if you're an Academy member, go ahead and download the worksheet, these 3 different exercises, and start using them in your practice. There's a backing track as well too. If you're not in the Academy, watch the video. It's up on the screen. You just have to press pause. Okay. And so it's something I feel strongly about. It's one of the main thing. Caged is one thing I feel strongly about. I think it had a ton of potential. And then as you move through the system, it falls flat. And the way arpeggios used to be taught. So not everything from back in the day was better. The way I was taught arpeggios was not useful to me until I did what I'm trying to get across to you today, is playing your arpeggios inside the scale patterns diatonically. Pick a note in the scale. G. Just go every other note from there. There's your G arpeggio in that key. And being able to go back and forth. In fact, what you might do is say you have a chord progression, try and find in one pattern, find the arpeggio notes for all of the chords right there under your fingers. Very powerful stuff. Very powerful. So I had a great time hanging out with you today. I hope you explore arpeggios in your scale patterns a little bit. That's the point I'm trying to get across. Start taking a look at these things. It can only be helpful for you. But what if you don't even know your scale patterns? Head on over to playguitaracademy.com. On the front page, scroll down. There'll be the Big 4 scale pattern worksheet. It's a free download and gives you all the patterns for the major, minor, major pentatonic, and minor pentatonic scales. These are the ones you're going to use 99% of the time. Or you can just click the link in the podcast right here in the description. And I'm going to call it. That's a wrap. Thanks for joining me today for the Play Guitar Podcast. Make sure to hit the button below to subscribe to the show. And if you have benefited from this podcast, please leave a review over there at Apple Podcasts. It helps. It really helps. It's the best way to make sure we get this very valuable content to more guitar players around the world. This Saturday, I have a Q&A for Academy members. You can join the Academy, try it out just for 2 weeks for $1. And then it's only $24 a month after that. And you get a lot more value than that from it. And we'll be doing a live Q&A on Saturdays at 5 p.m. Eastern. If you have any questions, you want to, share what your guitar playing experience is or your practice problems that you're having. We have a whole lot of people in there. And plus I go through a lot of these things live. It's like it's like a live class for members every week. It's a lot of fun. So I look forward to seeing you next time on the podcast, and I'll see you then. Bye-bye.